able to ask any questions on there. I know we've got a few people from different states, so I just wanted to let you know that we do have a number of different webinars that you can access from the Equestrian Queensland website. From the homepage, if you just go to member resources and then down to webinars, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen at the moment. Here we have just a number of different webinars that we've held over the last couple of years. So I know we've got a few event organisers. Now, some of our biosecurity is more relevant to Queensland, but there might be some information on there that's relevant to anybody. Managing anxiety to improve performance is for riders in particular. Rider full safety training, dealing with the crisis on social media, again, very popular, and we've got all of the replays available there for anybody that would like to watch them. So if you just bear with me for 2 seconds, I'll hand over to Will to continue the webinar.
Well, thanks everyone for joining me. Can everyone see the screen presentation now?
I can see your presentation, Will, so hopefully everyone else can.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Will MacArthur from Gow-Gates Insurance Brokers. I handle the Equestrian Australia insurance program in here amongst programs for a number of other sporting associations and organisations, and a number of organisations within the equine space. And what we'd like to do today is take clubs through some practical approaches to meeting your risk management objectives and making your clubs generally safer environments for participants, and I suppose improving the overall risk profile of the sport. Risk management itself can be quite a technical and a daunting concept for a lot of people, and whilst you do have some obligations being event organisers and being on committees, what we'd like to take you through are some practical steps that you can implement at a club level to meet your requirements and to improve the environment around your club. The obvious disclaimer to start with, this presentation, where it refers to the insurance, is a summary only of the program. Any information that I do give on the insurance itself and the policy should be taken in conjunction with the actual policy wordings. So that's just a general disclaimer at the start. The other part of this is this isn't presenting a comprehensive risk management plan for clubs. It doesn't take into account the individual circumstances of clubs, of any clubs themselves. So this is basically just some general advice about some practical solutions that you can take. So what risks are there in equestrian clubs? And we'll try and keep this as general as possible to all clubs and not just focus on, say, events organisers in one sphere. Say, for example, eventing, we'll try and keep it as general as possible. And this also exists across a lot of other sports. In terms of a practical approach to risk management, I think a practical approach to that is best done through the prism of some practical examples of claims and issues that have come up in the past, and some risk management initiatives that can deal with some specific types of incidents that can come up. So in terms of equestrian clubs and other examples from similar sports, there's obviously physical risks. They're the obvious ones, from serious rider injuries and horse injuries. We've also seen injuries to volunteers, and clubs do have a responsibility to your volunteers in terms of training and things like that, and also some property damage claims that have come up. It's a very big issue, obviously, where you've got horses involved who can bolt and cause damage and things like that. The other thing I'll take you through are some financial risks, and fraud and embezzlement, unfortunately, in a club environment is something that we've seen on the rise in the last couple of years. So there are also some practical issues that have come up recently, and we'll take you through some practical steps to those. But before we get into those, something I do want to talk about is why risk management in general. as club administrators, obviously at law, you do have some responsibilities. Your legal responsibility is obviously around, you have a duty of care to present a safe environment, not just to your members, but to the public at large. So that's to your members, guests, spectators, and obviously to other property that's in that's in your control and just in your grounds. The most common example of issues arise from that come obviously under civil liability claims. So that if someone gets injured and someone alleges you've breached your duty of care, that you were negligent in causing their injuries or causing property damage to their property, and you could get sued for that. On top of your legal responsibility, there's a wider social responsibility as well. So obviously as clubs and as event organisers, you want to put on the best event you can. A good event is obviously one that's free from safety issues, from drama involving issues with spectators and things like that. We want to protect your reputation as a club and enhance the reputation of the equestrian industry at large. The last reason, obviously, on the risk management side is also responsibility to the wider insurance program. So as EA clubs, a number of you fall under the EA club insurance program. The fewer and fewer claims there are on the insurance program, the better and better the rates will be and the premiums will be. And that obviously keeps the sport as affordable as possible. If there is a brazen attitude to risk management and a brazen attitude to risk in general, it's more and more likely that large claims will occur. And as large claims occur, the claims history deteriorates, and potentially insurers then have to review their rates, and premiums can increase. So a collective approach to risk management amongst all the clubs will help protect the insurance program in the long term, improve its sustainability, and help improve the premiums for all the clubs going forward where you're sharing that risk. In terms of the current landscape of risk management, and this is designed to sort of give you an idea of the idea that risk management of itself doesn't need to be a daunting concept. Risk management already exists well and truly in the equestrian landscape. Sometimes you just might not necessarily see where it's coming from. So the rules of the sport themselves have a very large focus on risk management. A practical example is obviously a lot of people will be aware that EA recently updated its requirements around standards for helmets. Improving the requirements and standards around helmets is an example of risk management. Clubs' member protection policies and committee procedures are examples of risk management. In most cases, your natural instincts as people involved in the equestrian industry around horses, natural instincts just as human beings, will provide practical solutions around risk management. If you notice that something is dangerous, in most cases you will try and do something to avoid or fix that risk. So risk management is basically the systemic approach to, in a lot of cases, what just comes naturally. What we're trying to do here is to give you some examples of how you can turn those quite simple ideas into a systemic approach, and what tools we've got that can help you also record what you're doing from a risk management perspective. Because whilst the concept itself can be quite daunting, we don't want that to be a barrier where everyone just panics, throws their hands in the air and says, it's all too hard. We actually want to sort of give you an example of how risk management is actually very present at the moment, and how you can then improve on that and build on that to ensure both that the risk management protocols are improved, and also that we've got evidence that there is a systemic approach to it. So I mentioned before the rules of the sport, and they tie in quite a bit with the insurance, and we actually get quite a few questions about that from a lot of clubs in terms of how the insurance and the rules of the sport relate to each other. So I thought I'd just take you through sort of what we perceive as everyone's role in setting the rules of the sport and adhering to the rules of the sport, and ensuring that the risk management aspects of the rules of the sport are actually delivered upon. So The governing body, in this case, EA and the state branches, have a role in setting the rules of the sport, and as part of their responsibility, safety of all participants, be that actual riders, be that attendees and spectators, animals, though the safety of all those people need to be the priority when setting those rules. And that's quite clear from some practical examples, like I mentioned before, around things like helmets, around things like biosecurity, around things like the general rules and heights for jumps, and a whole variety of different issues that exist and are catered for within the rules of the sport. Likewise, things like member protection policies and procedures. The rules and policies set down by the governing bodies give very serious consideration to the safety and welfare of all participants. If we go then to the role of the insurers themselves don't seek to change the way the sport itself, in this case equestrian, is conducted. They recognise that people within the equestrian industry are much better positioned to actually drive the rules of the sport within their responsibility. And they know and they expect that the governing body is placing safety as that primary consideration. So in that regard, the insurers aren't going to sit there and say, this is how you should conduct eventing, this is how you should conduct show jumping, or those things. They can give some practical solutions around some wider risk management initiatives, but to the large extent, they actually place that responsibility back on the governing bodies in terms of setting those rules. To the next level down, it's the role of club administrators and officials to implement the rules of the sport. As club administrators, you're the ones more day-to-day on the ground running your own events in line with the rules of the sport, and also the processes and policies that are put around them. A good example of this is the role of a technical delegate. So in eventing, a technical delegate's role is to basically ensure that compliance, so that the course designer's course is built properly and is compliant with the rules of the sport. For starters, that's a great example of risk management. The rules of the sport cater to a very good checking procedure around compliance of the course with the rules. So it's the role of club administrators to ensure that all those practical steps that are actually catered for within the rules of the sport are well administered. A level down from that, you've got the role of participants themselves, and they've got a role in actually adhering to the rules. If we come back to the example before of helmets, it's up to the governing body to set the rules, it's up to the club itself to implement the rules, but there's a responsibility on the participants themselves to actually abide by those rules that are set. So that kind of gives you an idea of the flow from an insurance perspective itself on risk management and how that all ties in. From there, I suppose what we would like to do is go on to some practical examples of risks that exist in the equestrian sphere from some claims that we've seen, and work through some ideas about how that scenario going forward can be managed to avoid that kind of claim happening again. So a claim that we have seen is where a horse in a show jumping competition steps on a nail in the show jumping arena. So first and foremost, it would if that's happened, it would seem that either the arena may not have been checked for nails beforehand, or that it might have been missed. Look, accidents are always going to happen. No matter how well an arena is checked, nails themselves aren't always that big. They can easily be missed. So in this case, it can come down to how do we best actually set up the club to be able to defend itself if a claim happens in that scenario. So the big one is systematically checking arenas before use. That can be at the start of the day, especially if you're hiring a facility, a check before the day of the arena or whatever facility you're using to ensure that it's in a safe and compliant condition will do that. So then we go to the question of how do we systematically do that? The big part is it's not just a case of getting someone to have a quick look over the grounds, but then at the end of the day, no one knows really who did it, how they did it, how often they've done it, what they were actually looking for. what we'd like to do is, and what we provide, are some resources there where people who are doing those checks can record that they're doing them and that they're doing them all the time, so that if it comes down to defending a claim, you can say, look, this accident did occur, potentially. Look, in this case, there was no doubt that the horse had trodden on a nail. But we've actually, we as a club have taken every reasonable step that we possibly could have to have avoided that happening. And here's our documented proof of what we did to prevent that kind of thing from happening. So what I'll talk a bit later about is an iPhone app that we've developed that club administrators can use. It's got the EA club list loaded into it that you can use to actually record these kind of facility checks before an event occurs. The other side of things in this regard was the post-incident management, and this comes down to the insurance side of things and minimising the claim. What had happened in this scenario was basically that when it happened, the club straight away turned around and said, "Oh, that's terrible, and we're responsible, and we'll pay all your vet fees." Now, under the public liability insurance, that was basically construed as an admission of liability, which it clearly was. They basically agreed to make a payment as damages to the injured or to the owners of the horse. That basically prejudices the insurer's position, because the insurer is then left in a position where it's almost impossible for them to then turn around and try and defend the claim. Now, in this case, the insurers did help out the club, and they were able to come in and pay a settlement on that. But in many cases, the insurer in that situation would be within their rights to actually turn around and say, well, you as a club have now very significantly prejudiced our position and our ability to defend this claim, and they can actually reduce the cover that they give to a club in that scenario. So we're always there in the first instance to advise clubs if an incident like that does occur on what to say, how to approach the post-incident management of that, so that you do deal with your member or the injured party and the stakeholders around that, whilst also maintaining compliance with the insurance policy itself. So in this case, twofold. One is what you can do prior to an event to prevent this kind of thing occurring, which is obviously checking the arenas and doing that regularly and documenting it so that there's very solid evidence of what you've done, where you've checked and how thorough that was. And also post-event in managing the relevant stakeholders involved in the incident, to ensure that you as clubs are best protected under the insurance policy. An incident that we saw, this was actually outside of Equestrian, but it's quite pertinent, was actually a canteen worker who was a volunteer at the club burnt their hand on a pie warmer. They suffered a minor infection in their hand, turned into a major infection that went up their arm, up their neck, and actually damaged their optic nerve. They lost sight in one eye. They then sued the club, and the damages that were awarded basically said the proximate cause of that injury was the burn on their hand. So even if there were other contributing factors that led to the eye injury, the proximate cause of the overall injury was the fact that they burnt their hand in the canteen. Now, to some extent, so an issue was that there was not a safety warning on the pie warmer that club had that said, caution, the pie warmer is hot. Now, you can argue quite strongly that it should be an obvious risk, but in this case, the award of damages was quite, and the judgment was quite generous. And it turned out that, yeah, there was a significant award of damages made against the club because they breached their duty of care, and they were deemed to be negligent for not providing the adequate training and not providing the adequate warning signs that said that there were dangerous situations within this person's role being a volunteer in the canteen. The award was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which was covered under the club's public liability insurance in this case. Now, that presents some issues there. At a practical sense, most people, if they are helping out the club on canteen duty, won't be given training. Most people would assume that it's a pretty straightforward task. You stand in a canteen, you pull out pies from the pie warmer, you sell them for a couple of dollars, and that makes the club a bit of money. But at the same time, what this has shown us is that there are some significant risks involved there and some exposures to the club. So what does that mean? It could mean as a club, and what we'd recommend is actually setting up a volunteer induction program where anyone who's going to volunteer for the club, be that in the canteen, helping out in the car park, directing traffic, any of those things, are given some basic training before they start as to what the expectations of you as a club are and how they can fulfill their role as safely as possible. Now, if that's at a canteen stage, it might be the person who regularly manages the volunteers in the canteen, taking anyone new through where everything is, how it works. If it's a case of a pie warmer, only touch this on the handles, and the sides and everything do get quite hot. Just some basic things so that when it actually comes down to defending any sort of claim like this that can come up, you can sit there and testify that yes, training was given and these were the kind of things that were taken, that we were taking the volunteers through. The other part of it obviously comes down to safety warning signs. In this case, the pie warmer was quite old, and the warning signs had the standard attached warning signs had faded and come off, and it can be something that may need the club to take an approach that if you notice that those sort of warning labels have faded or come off, you might need to make some of your own and attach them to the wall of the canteen nearby or something like that to ensure compliance. Now, this situation can seem very far-fetched and quite ridiculous, and even from our perspective on the insurance side, when we were first presented with it, we thought exactly that. But it does still provide some key learnings that you can take out of it, and something that we'd like to, we think can assist practically going forward. Property damage is something that we're seeing more and more from a risk perspective. Damage to cars when a horse escapes is something that is becoming more and more prevalent. There's two sides to this. One is under the public liability insurance that clubs have, there's a $2,500 excess that's payable by, in this case, it would be the club. If you're the body that action is being taken against, if someone's saying you've damaged my car and I'm going to, or something in your control, or it's your responsibility has damaged my car, I'm going to take action to recover the costs of repairs. There's a $2,500 excess on the public liability policy. Now, in a lot of circumstances, that might be the degree of the damage that this person's claiming. So the protection under the public liability insurance for such a minor incident may not be everything the club needs, and the club could be actually out of pocket for obviously the first $2,500 there. So the best thing we've got to do here is try and make it that clubs are not liable for these kind of incidents. One is obviously preventing them happening as much as possible, and the other one is putting yourselves in a position where you can be in a good position to defend it. So in terms of layout and design, where are you parking the cars so that if a horse escapes from the arena, is it going to end up quite easily in the car park? Obviously, the majority of events are going to have horse trucks, horse floats near a car park. There are going to be horses near cars. So to an extent, it's unavoidable. But there can also be this situation where we can practically avoid the situation where the car parking is right next to the arena, especially if you're on a more open facility. Now, if you're at an actual equestrian centre where there's a defined car park and you can't avoid it, then this scenario, that sort of risk management may not be applicable in that instance. But if you've got some control over what paddock what you're going to use for the car parking that day and that kind of things, it could be worth actually having a think about how close to one of the competition arenas the area you're using as a car park is, because it's just a practical step to try and avoid some of the risk of horses coming into contact with cars. The other one can be around terms and conditions around parking. Some good examples in terms of signage that can go up. So when you're entering a car park area, a sign basically saying, these are the terms of entry, you're parking at your own risk, damage can quite foreseeably occur, and you're accepting the chance that damage might occur and that the club takes no responsibility from that. If a sign like that doesn't exist, another way of doing it is actually on a parking ticket, effectively, so that when someone enters the car park and one of your volunteers is directing them where to park, they're actually presented with a little slip printout that has like their parking ticket on it. It may still be given to them for free, or maybe with your parking charge that you apply or your entry charge that you apply. But on that slip, it can also give the terms and conditions of their entry to the facility and to their entry to the car park. Again, saying the club takes no responsibility. Those can assist in defending the claim. They're not going to be the get out of jail free card, but they are going to be able to assist in defending a claim, because when someone turns around and says, it's your fault, my car got damaged, I want you to pay for it, you are in a position, and we are in a position to go back to them and say, well, actually, on your terms of entry, it said that the club doesn't take responsibility for these kinds of things, and it can put you in a much stronger position to assist in defending a claim. Again, some practical tools that can be easily implemented to try and mitigate the chance of these risks happening. Obviously, the most tragic of these scenarios is serious injuries to riders. Equestrian, by its nature, can be a dangerous activity, and I don't think there's any dispute that there are aspects of equestrian that are just inherently dangerous. Prevention of incidents themselves can be difficult just by the nature of the sport. Falls will occur. We're dealing with 500-kilogram animals that can be quite flighty. I think it's a relatively accepted fact that people can get injured. So we just want to try and minimise that as much as possible for the reputation of the sport, for the reputation of you as clubs, and all that kind of thing. So practically, adherence to safety protocols and rules is going to help minimise serious injuries. But at the same time, they will occur. That's where things like waivers come in. So when anyone signs up to be a member of EQ or any of the other EA state branches, there's obviously a dangerous activity acknowledgement that comes along with joining as a member. Anyone who's riding and is not a member has to sign that same dangerous activity acknowledgement and waiver whenever they're entering an event. And using those waivers and the EA approved waivers is a very strong way that you as clubs can assist in defending claims if someone is injured whilst participating and then claims against the club. It basically, those dangerous activity acknowledgements quite clearly state that the person who's entering an event, or their parents if they're under 18, acknowledge that equestrian sport poses risks and that they openly and willingly accept those risks, and that they won't claim against you as club administrators if an incident occurs. Now, those waivers themselves, again, aren't a get out of jail free card. They're not something that you can basically say, well, you're not allowed to sue us anymore. But if they do turn around and sue, you're in a much stronger position in defending a claim, because they can't, the third party, the injured party, can't turn around and claim, I was never aware of the risks that this posed. The next side of physical rider injury risks is the recording and the reporting of what's actually occurred in an incident. So coming down to assisting in defending a claim if a claim comes up, and a big part of risk management after the event and minimising the club's exposure to a claim that may come in after an event has happened can be sometimes just as good as well, not just as good, but can be quite helpful in defending that claim. So the big part is EA has incident report forms on their website. We are more than happy at an insurance level to keep receiving incident report forms. We can file them, we can triage them, we can talk to impacted clubs, and we can report them to the insurers as required to open up a liability claim. The big thing with those incident reports is that they put some very basic background information on paper as soon as practical after an event has occurred, whilst it's freshest in everyone's minds. Because the statute of limitations can be a minimum of 3 years. So basically means that it could be that 2.5 years after someone had a fall at one of your events, they can still turn around and take legal action against you. In 2.5 years' time, how many people from your club are going to practically know what safety checks were done, exactly what the scenario was on the day, how secure the jump was, or anything like that? Whereas if some basic reporting and recording is done at the time, it means that we've actually got a good record of how everything was set up, of who was present, of who we can use as a witness in your defence come the time of the claim. We've seen some claims going back a number of years where the reporting from the club has been outstanding, and it's massively assisted us and the legal representatives that we end up appointing to the clubs in defending that claim. It would have been, in some of these cases, very, very hard to prevent the incident happening just by the nature of the sport. But at the same time, the reporting and the recording post-incident of who was there, what they saw, how they can be contacted, means that we can actually get a very good record on our file to defend a claim if it does come in down the track. The other type of risk I mentioned before was financial risks. Fraud and embezzlement is something that very unfortunately in a club environment is on the rise, and we know for a fact that in a lot of clubs it's a very collegiate environment, and there's a lot of trust that's built up between very dedicated volunteers. And to think that that's eroded is actually quite tragic in the sporting context. But at the same time, realistically these days it seems now like some basic practical scenarios need to be implemented as a risk management tool for clubs to avoid significant amounts of money being stolen. In the case of some sporting clubs, and we're talking community sporting clubs, we've seen $20,000 and up to $100,000 embezzled from clubs by people who were on the committee. But to avoid that can actually be really simple. So the three biggest tools that we can recommend in this situation. The first one's quite obvious: dual signatories on all payments. There's a dual signatory on a cheque, dual signatory or 2 authorisations on electronic payment transfers. The second one is in terms of committee meetings and the presentation of financials. When a financial report's presented to a committee meeting, we actually recommend that printouts of the bank statements are presented alongside them, so that when the treasurer turns up and says, we've got $20,000 in the bank, or we've got $3,000 in the bank, or whatever it might be, that the bank statement actually sits alongside it with that same amount of money sitting there. Because what we'd seen in a couple of these scenarios is the treasurer was actually still there providing very good reports back to the committee saying, well, this is our financial position, this is how much we spent last month, and et cetera, et cetera. It's just that actually bore no resemblance to the truth. The treasurer in some of these situations had been just siphoning off the funds, and that when another committee member ended up seeing the bank account, there was almost nothing left. The other practical tool that can be implemented in that situation is be very wary of being chased for payment. So if a third-party supplier or someone like that is following up an invoice, sometimes the treasurer might turn around, or whoever is responsible can say, oh yeah, look, I'll make sure that that's paid, I'll make sure that that's paid. And then a month later, or a couple of weeks later, that supplier is chasing up again. That's a very good indicator as a club that it's worth having a much closer look at the club's bank accounts. In 99% of the cases in that, it can just be an oversight. It can just be that everyone's busy and all those sort of things. You might just be waiting for people to pay their memberships or a sponsor to pay their sponsorship and that sort of thing. But it can just be a trigger to have a closer look at that. We don't want to erode trust between committee members and that kind of thing, because we know this is a very strong community environment. But at the same time, We don't want to have the situation where clubs are left tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket because of one bad egg. So if we can get to the situation where everybody is just that bit more comfortable in asking the questions and having that open transparency, then all clubs will be in a much better situation going forward. I mentioned before in terms of some of the horse injury that we had an iPhone app, something that we've developed over the last couple of years as a practical tool to do the work that risk management checklists had previously done. So for a while, we've had a pre-event checklist where before the event starts, you can take a checklist around that asks some practical questions about the facility, the environment on the day, and all those kind of pertinent, basic risk management questions that can then be jotted down as a good record of what's been done in terms of some physical risk management before the event starts. We've taken that to the next level with an iPhone app that does exactly the same thing, but provides much better recording and reporting of that. So it's available in the iTunes store. If you just search for Gow-Gates Equestrian, it pops up like you can see on your screen there. From there, you can go to the event day inspection. The event day inspection itself is the tool that asks you some pertinent questions about the event. The list of EA insured clubs sits in the background. That's updated periodically based on the club insurance renewals that come in. So all the clubs that are insured under the EA club insurance are automatically loaded up into that app periodically. So what you can do is you can go in, select or search for your club. So in this case, when I did it before, I picked Wallaby Hills Horse Trials, put my name in and my position. So in this case, I put just Gow-Gates, but in some cases it might be technical delegate, it might be risk management officer, it might be club secretary or anything like that. The name, we do request that people put their name in because it makes it much more official once it's done. But if there are genuine concerns around putting your name to the risk management checklist, we're happy for that to be just put with an NA or something like that. But at the same time, in defense of a claim, in defending a claim, the checklist itself is much stronger if a name is put to it, because that person can then be, that person themselves can then attest to what they did in putting that checklist forward. It's not to say that that person will actually have action taken against them. In fact, that's most likely not going to be the scenario at all. It's just that when it comes time to defending a claim, we can actually have that person become, assist as a witness for the club in what they did and how they conducted that checklist. It's not designed to aid someone having a witch hunt, and that's not what the tool will do. It's there to assist the club in defending a claim if it does come up, and from a practical perspective, reducing the chance of incidents happening in general. These are some of the ideas or the questions that can come up. So, are the grounds compliant with EA regulations and bylaws? Are the competition areas and stables clear of any debris that may cause increased risk of injury? Things like broken glass, uneven surfaces, exposed tree roots, that kind of thing. When you're filling in the checklist, if you tick yes, that everything is okay, it will take you to the next question. If you tick no, and that you say that there is an issue, it will actually prompt you to provide a bit more information. Again, this isn't designed to be a witch hunt. In certain circumstances, the answer may very well be no. And that can be okay. What we'd actually like you to do is to say what action you've taken to then minimise that risk. So on the right-hand side, you can say, we answered no to one of the questions. What actions have been taken? Nails were found in the surface. We carefully examined it. We removed all the nails. So you've actually been able to write in the box what you've done. What you can also do, and what it will also prompt you to do, is add photos. So you can take a photo of what area you identified as a risk, and then you can also take a photo of what happened afterwards. It could be that you noticed a pothole. Take a photo of the pothole, fill it in, compact it, do whatever you need to do, even out the surface. Take another photo. This is the situation that we left it in once we had mitigated that risk. It's a prime example of a practical solution that was taken by the club in this circumstance to mitigate that risk. Now, if that during the day was to come loose again or something like that, it still aids the club throughout the day in saying, look, we actually took whatever practical approach we could at the time to minimise that risk. So in a general sense, what can clubs do? Like we said, risk management, we don't want it to be a scary concept that people run away from, because there are some very simple practical solutions that can be implemented. There's the match day or the event day inspection checklists. There's the online risk management tutorial on our website. There's injury prevention tools. There's seminars such as these, and there's our iPhone app that can be practical tools to assist you in being aware of the risks that exist and in putting in some practical tools to minimise the risk. What will it mean? Well, right from the start, a lower chance of claims occurring. That's the primary consideration of anyone. That would mean that there's fewer injuries, that there's fewer incidents of property damage and that sort of thing. There's a lower chance of claims occurring in the first place. There's a better chance of defending claims. When it comes down to, you know, if an accident does occur and someone turns around and sues and the lawyers are getting involved, the better the scenario we can present to the people charged with defending the club's position and minimising any damages, even though they're damages that are most likely covered under the insurance program, we want to give your lawyers in this case the best chance of defending a claim. From a purely social perspective, safer and happier participants. That's fantastic. That's going to help the sport grow in general. And in minimising claims, it leads to more sustainable and better insurance premiums. That's what we're trying. That's another thing we're trying to achieve in the long run, to make the sport as affordable as possible and to be able to grow and direct some benefits in much better areas and provide funding in much better areas when the claims are kept down. So from my perspective, that's some practical tools that we can run through. We can obviously be contacted with any specific questions through our website, by email, on those phone numbers. More than happy to take any questions that do come up from time to time from clubs individually. But yeah, I think that's sort of the overarching message. If there is any practical assistance that we can give you, more than happy to talk you through that when the time comes. But other than that, thank you everyone for your time, and yeah, I'll look forward to talking to you and meeting a lot of you out at various events in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. I can't see any questions that have come through, but if anyone has got any questions, just send them through now. I certainly think you gave everyone some great things to think about. I know horse and rider safety is always really important and is always paramount in organisers' minds, but I think you've brought up a few different points that may not always be thought of. Okay, so we have just had something come through. Somebody just made a comment about negligence, that many people are frightened of being found negligent. Many people have their hearts in the right place and just want to do the right thing.
Yep. So I think in that regard, we need to look at the role of the insurance program in that regard. The insurance is there to provide a layer of protection to clubs. If an incident occurs, many claimants, so the third party, the injured party, will just take a scattergun approach. They will try and join as many people in the claim as their lawyers think they could potentially get money out of. That could be the facility owners, the club, and a variety of other people. In an eventing context, it might be the course designer or something like that themselves. The EA insurance program is there to provide a public liability. So if we take it in the public liability context, the EA insurance program is there to provide a public liability policy that pays the damages that come out of any finding of negligence. But it may be along the way that the lawyers that are appointed on the back of that sit there and go, look, unfortunately, it's not practical necessarily to defend this claim. We might choose to take the angle of settling it. A finding of negligence, but if we go purely back to a financial level, if it's a bodily injury claim, the excess on the policy is nil. So if it's a claim from a third party saying I was injured, there's no excess payable. If it's a claim under for property damage, so someone's damaged a car or something like that, the excess is $2,500. That's the extent of the financial exposure under the public liability insurance to a club or a committee or a coach or anyone like that. So the concept of being found negligent is probably it's daunting as a concept, but at the same time, the insurance is there to protect you if the worst happens. So the policy is actually there to take the financial risk outside of that. If a claim occurs, it is unfortunately going to be, to an extent, emotionally taxing. It's going to be taxing from a time perspective, but financially, the policy is there to protect you. And in terms of our advice and the kind of legal advisors we put in place, we're there to guide you through that process as much as we can. So, look, equestrian is a sport where there are physical risks, and it can be that accidents will happen and that people will allege negligence, but there are insurance policies that are in place to protect you if someone is alleging that you are negligent.
And somebody's just asked a question about the app. Is that available for Android phones as well?
Unfortunately, not at this point, but hopefully in the meantime, there is someone at the club level who has access to an iOS device, an Apple device that it can be used on in that club environment.
And another question has just come through. Could you please clarify the difference between public liability versus indemnity versus civil liability? Just a very simple snapshot, if possible.
Sure. There's three types of liability policies that clubs have at the moment. There's public liability, professional indemnity, and management liability. Public liability covers you for third-party bodily injury and property damage. So a rider's injured and they sue you, a spectator's injured and they sue you, a horse causes damage to some property and the person whose property is damaged sues you. That's basically what public liability is there for. Professional indemnity covers the professional exposure that might exist. So if it's an allegation of a breach of professional duty. Outside of an equestrian context, it's kind of the medical malpractice is probably a sort of a day-to-day example. You relied on someone's professional advice. That advice turned out to be wrong, and you suffered a loss from that. So in the case of equestrian, coaches are a big example. So someone follows the advice of a coach, and that leads to them losing out financially. A breach of professional duty by a course designer in the way they've designed the course or a mistake that they make. They're the kind of things that can come under professional indemnity. Management liability, the third one, is a directors and officers type policy. So that's cover for the club, the committee's exposure for any wrongful acts, for the decisions that are made as a committee for things like harassment, abuse, fraud and embezzlement, employment practices issues, so unfair dismissal and those kinds of things. Going back a step, the concept of civil liability. So civil liability is the type of claim that might be brought against you. So the Civil Liability Act is a legal act that exists in most states. That's what people would be claiming against you, or that they would be suing you under the Civil Liability Act if they were making a public liability claim. That's probably the easiest way of saying of that one. So if someone is injured, they'll submit a claim against you under the Civil Liability Act. You'll claim it under your public liability policy.
So if a committee member was found to be negligent, are they still covered under the club's insurance?
That's exactly what the policy is there for. It's designed to cover your negligence. So put it this way, if the club was found not to be negligent, the policy would be defending you and sort of successfully defending you. If it's alleged that you're negligent, that's why someone's suing you. They're alleging your negligence and you're covered under the policy. The only types of things that might be excluded under the policy if it's actually an allegation that you deliberately injured someone. That's the kind of thing that's excluded, but public liability policies are actually there specifically to cover you if you're negligent.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions that have been asked. Thank you, Will. So we'll get the recording of this put up on the Equestrian Queensland website, hopefully by Monday or Tuesday next week. So if anybody's missed it, or if you want any of your other committee members to watch it, it will be there available to watch at any time. But if anybody has got any further questions, Will's provided his email address there, and I know there's links from the EQ website and also the EA website to the equestrian part of the Gow-Gates website, which includes lots of information about what's actually covered under the club's insurance policies and also the individual's insurance policies as well. So if that's it for the questions, I think we'll finish there. But thank you very much, Will. That was really informative.
No worries. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.